this is a Joseph Campbell quote. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The cave you fear to enter is the part of yourself that you have left in the shadows, as the part of yourself that you have distanced yourself from. Loving yourself, cultivating yourself is about looking at those parts that you've abandoned and moving into them because the treasure is in there.
All right, hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the What You Don't Hear podcast. This is an open journal dive into people's lives as I sit and I uncover the real story behind my guest's journey, finding out what makes them who they are, talking about all the ups, all the downs, and all the thoughts and feelings in between, uncovering the parts of their story that, well, we otherwise wouldn't get to hear about. I am your host. My name is Ross Tyson. I'm a creative of many kinds, a maker of many, many things. And in this episode, this is one that I am genuinely very, very excited to share with you. It's a super fun conversation with the very talented Andy J. Pizza. Now, Andy is an illustrator and a best-selling author of a few different children's books that he has created. He's also the host of the Creative Pep Talk podcast. And as you're about to find out here in just a few minutes, he's just a very nice and very chill dude on top of all those things. So I'm very, very stoked to share this conversation with you. But before we dive into that chat, let me tell you about a few amazing supporters, sponsors, and partners that I have here on the show. Let's pay some bills, thank the folks who help me keep the mics on around here, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So first up, this month, I get to welcome another brand new partner here on the podcast. It's one that I am genuinely very excited to get to share with you and tell you about as someone who has had some major mental health battles over the years. It's something that I've shared pretty openly in the past on this show in previous episodes. And we all know that mental health is now a more prevalent topic of discussion than ever before. However, as awareness increases, so do the associated statistics. While awareness is crucial, it alone does not drive the change. And that change is where our new partners in Scatter Joy enter into the picture. The Scatter Joy Project is a local organization here in Columbus that transcends the role of a nonprofit. It's more of a movement that is designed to truly bridge this gap that we were talking about. Fueled by the belief in intentional conversations, raised voices, dismantled barriers, and enhanced accessibility, their goal is to make mental health care more affordable for everyone and more accessible for everybody. So how do they do this? Well, they've built a few different ways to help support the cause. One of those main avenues is that they sell apparel where 100% of the profits go towards funding things like their very own crisis text line, their network to help connect people with the mental health help that they need, and their very own therapy fund to help people cover the costs of therapy sessions. So whether you're looking to get help or that you want to donate and help support the cause, you should absolutely look into Scatter Joy. So if you want to find out more about them in general, you can find them on Instagram at The Scatter Joy Project, or you can find them online at thescatterjoyproject.com. And I cannot thank them enough for being down to partner up with this podcast, support this podcast, become a sponsor, and just kind of allow me to, help spread the word about what they're doing, because I really do believe in it. I think they're trying to do some really, really cool stuff in the mental health field. And yeah, those efforts I absolutely think should be talked about as much as humanly possible. So go check them out, the Scatter Joy Project. This episode is also sponsored by our friends over at Midwest Photo. Now, Midwest Photo is a video, audio, and of course, a photo store located right here in Columbus. Now, Midwest is a place that I, as someone who has dabbled in photography over the years, it's a place that I've been to many times for many different reasons. And I'm here to tell you, it's a real rad place filled with real rad people. And I'm genuinely so excited that they have joined the show here as a sponsor. So let's talk about what is all inside the walls of Midwest Photo. Well, there's plenty of reasons that I've went there over the years, whether it's to purchase some camera gear ranging from everything from cameras themselves to lighting, backdrops, tripods. In fact, one of the tripods that the cameras that film this show are sitting on came from Midwest. But the list, of course, goes on all the way down to small things like SD cards. They truly have it all. Now, of course, if you're not looking to purchase, the good news is they also offer gear rental as well. It's in a list of many services that their intelligent and overly helpful staff are ready to help you with the moment you walk in the door. For real, whenever I've went in there for something, there is always someone ready to answer some questions and talk to you about video or photo or just the creative world in general. But along with rentals, they also offer a full in-house printing service, film development and scanning, used gear, buy and sell, and even classes and events so you can further your knowledge about the art and craft of photography. And the cool thing is, when you shop with them, you're not just supporting local and shopping small, but you're supporting folks who truly love photography and do a lot of work to support the local photo community here in Columbus. So go check them out. If you do, tell them that What You Don't Hear sent you their way. And if you want to find out more information on everything that they're about for yourself, you can follow them online at impex_photo_video, or simply jump to impex.com. That's MPEX.com. And I cannot thank them enough for sponsoring this episode. We are also supported by Promo West Productions. Now, over the last 2 years, I've gotten to tell you about so many cool concerts that happen here in Columbus. And in this episode, well, it's happening again because I've got some more concerts to tell you all about right now. So if you're interested in catching a live show, getting that live music experience here in Columbus, Ohio, then you may want to check out one of these upcoming concerts coming your way via Promo West Productions. They've got Death Clock at Kemba Live on April 11th. Then Hippie Sabotage at Kemba Live on April 16th. Then the Veronicas come to town. They play at Newport Music Hall on April 17th. And then Chris Young plays at Kemba Live on Friday, May 3rd. So if you want to grab tickets to any of those shows, you can jump to AXS.com. Or, as always, for more information on these or any other upcoming concerts, if you want to know who's coming to town and when, find all that information that you need over at promowestlive.com. All right, it is time for a very, very fun conversation where I get to know Andy J. Pizza as we dive into his story and, of course, talk all things Andy. This is genuinely a great one, at least in my opinion. I'm always going to be biased on this podcast. It is my show, after all. Why would I tell you anything other than it's going to be a great one? But really, though, this is a very, very fun conversation. I think there's so much to enjoy about it. I would list all of those things out for you here. But I mean, you're about to hear it all in the conversation itself. So let's let a podcast version of me and my guest Andy do all the talking in that sense. So here it is. Grab something yellow, toss in your headphones, pull up a seat. It's time to get to know somebody a whole lot better than you have before. This is episode 106 of What You Don't Hear with my guest Andy J. Pizza. Yo, dude, wait, hurry it up, would you?
What the hell?
Rant and ramble if you want to rant and ramble. But
that's the only way I know how.
Perfect. Well, then it sounds like we're ready to make a podcast.
I think so.
If you're down to rant and ramble.
Pretty much all I do.
Incredible. Well, in that case, you're in the right place. Andy, dude, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I appreciate I appreciate you being down.
Columbus podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be a first. I don't know, but
first for you being okay. Yeah. Well, I'm stoked because we have never met before.
True.
So this is a very first time meeting.
I can vouch for that.
Yes. Yeah.
It's true.
I can say, you know what? Fact check at the beginning. We have in fact never met.
True.
No, dude, but I have admired your work for a while from afar.
Man. That's really nice.
You have been on the list of guests that I have wanted for a little bit of time, if I'm being honest. I've just been, the last 4 years of doing the show, I have been just amassing this big guest list of all the different people I want on. You have been on it for a minute.
Dude, that's great. Thanks,
so
man.
I'm very, very stoked that we are making this happen.
Glad to hear it.
And honestly, I kind of just want to open up the floodgates and just dive straight in.
All right.
Because I obviously I don't do like an investigatory detective work before a guest comes in, right? Yeah. I know generally what they do, but outside of that, I don't know much more. How would you lay out what all you do?
I would probably say I'm an illustrator and podcaster. That's probably the most straightforward way to say it, and it's probably how anybody that knows me probably thinks of me that way.
Yeah.
I've kind of over the past few years become more of a picture book maker.
Yeah.
That's become like a pretty primary focus for me. But I think, it sounds pretentious, but I think it's actually true that storytelling is really my passion and really and I don't mean that in an abstract way. I mean that in a very almost traditional way. Like I'm kind of obsessed with storytelling. And I think that runs through all the stuff.
Right. I honestly, I tend to sum up a lot of what I do in the same way, right?
Yeah,
Because for me, it's like I always strip things down to, and again, cheesy and cliche, but I always strip things down to like the why. What's, if I were to give myself a purpose or my why, what is it, right? And one of my whys absolutely is storytelling, because I do love to do that in so many different forms.
Yeah.
And so I 100% am like, yes, the umbrella of storytelling, that could be attached to any different form of doing that.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, I am a big believer in kind of abstracting it as much as possible, because I think, like your childhood dreams, they're these very big, lofty things, and the seed beneath them often I feel like is like a more abstract impulse rather than... and I like that because as we go through time, everything's changing rapidly. Like I couldn't have dreamt of being a podcaster because it didn't exist.
Right.
And so I like that idea of trying to figure out what's the core of this thing, and then I can apply it to whatever opportunities are kind of available.
100%. Now, when you were a kid, what were those dreams? Was it always like some form of like animation, art, something?
Not really. Like I always drew pictures. I did really the time that I was kind of ripe for picture books. I did become really obsessed with like a handful of books. And like Shel Silverstein, I had a phase where I was just like reading them all the time and then making my own and like illustrating them. And I definitely had probably an extended moment, because I was probably into picture books earlier and later than most kids.
Okay.
And then after that, I had a big season of probably like 12 to 16, really, really convinced myself that I was going to try to be on Saturday Night Live. So that's really, I would have died on that hill at that time.
Okay.
And so, so that was a big season. And then I think when I was about 16, I think life started getting real. I was like, dude, this is going to happen really soon. And I didn't know any, I grew up, I lived all over the place, but it was always in kind of like smaller places and in the Midwest mostly. And, I just didn't know anybody that did comedy or acting or anything. Like it just seemed like that is a complete impossibility, and maybe it is. I don't know. I know more people now that do that, but not very many.
Yeah.
And but so I think I shifted gears. But also when I was about 16, I think I started to get more serious about life generally. So like all the way up until I was about 16, 17, I wasn't interested in real life, and everything was kind of a joke. Like I was just trying to have as much fun as possible. And then I think I just had a handful of things happen that kind of shifted gears, and I don't want to say more serious because it sounds really boring, but I just became more interested in like real life.
Of course. Yeah.
And so that's when I started getting into music and then illustration and design and that kind of thing, and kind of shifted my...
Okay, so was comedy was comedy one of the first maybe loves?
Yeah, I was obsessed with comedy.
Okay.
I was obsessed with like Ace Ventura. I watched that way too early. Like watched it in the theaters. That was 1993, so I was 6.
Okay.
And Dumb and Dumber and The Mask. Like, that was all 1 year. I don't know if you know that.
Oh wow, I did not know that. Okay,
that's crazy. I mean, that was a crazy run.
I would have assumed like, man, the decade of all those movies coming out.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
1 year. So that was a crazy year. And it changed my life. I was like, dude, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Is be Jim Carrey. And so then, I kind of was obsessed with comedy. I was really obsessed with comedy acting. Mm-hmm. I'm now really like most, I feel like modern creators obsessed with stand-up. I feel like it's everyone that, it's a pretty common thing.
Right.
But comedy acting. And I didn't really have any, there's not a lot, like we made a lot of videos and stuff. Like we did that. but there wasn't any like formal place to put that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
There
I
wasn't
think
a
I just-
YouTube to just hop
Yeah.
to and be like, and we have a web series now.
Yeah. We like did a lot of skits kind of in public that we didn't film. We're just like doing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like that
okay.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like, probably up until when I was like 16, 17, comedy was the only thing. It was the only thing I was thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you also said that you moved around a lot
Yeah.
when you were a kid. Like, what's growing up like? Take me back. Like,
Yeah. So I was born in southern Indiana, south of Indy, and was there until sixth grade. Moved to Western New York for 3 years with my dad's job. Kind of went all over the place. Then we went back to Indiana, but to a different town. So none of my same friends. Like that was kind of weird. And then after high school, went to the UK, and I lived in the UK for 5 years.
Wow.
And anybody that kind of knows a little, like anybody that listens to the podcast or knows the book I just put out, knows that my wife is from England and we met over there and all that kind of thing.
Incredible. Okay, so you literally were all over the place.
All over the place. And then, I feel like we've been in Ohio. I've probably been in Ohio longer than I've been anywhere. So
Okay.
I've now been here for 9 years. So
Do you feel like this will be where
I
you're
think this
staying?
is it. Yeah. I think this is it.
No
I
more
think
moves?
my kids are like pretty, they're really grounded, and I think it seems really powerful, valuable for your kids to be grounded. And I liked moving around. In retrospect,
Okay.
I liked it. There are
Yeah.
definitely challenges. And I like some of the like benefits and tools that I think it gave me, but it was pretty difficult, you know?
Is there any part of you that feels like the attraction to like comedy or like doing skits and stuff? Do you feel like that was almost like a safety net for you of like moving around of like, if I'm funny, I can collect friends who want to be funny with me and like...
I don't know, and I don't mean to like just stop that train of thought.
Yeah, no.
I think it was more because funny was more like a personal thing for me. It was like,
Yeah.
this is just something that I do all the time. I think it's more connected to ADHD. It's just
Okay.
more of a way of being like, and I still feel like this. If I get really bored or I feel really like, if I get into a creative rut where I'm just kind of working on a deadline, like let's say I'm like way behind on a project, I can find myself getting sillier and sillier and sillier all the other times, like, going out to dinner or hanging out with my family or whatever. And so I think it's kind of like a release valve for ADHD and making anything interesting. Anything.
Yeah,
You can make,
okay.
you're alone in your room and you can be interesting if you're being silly and weird. And,
Right.
and I think actually moving around, I would actually credit moving around to, making it hard for me to identify as a funny person, because when you move schools, at least my experience was, every school kind of thinks different things are funny. And so
yeah.
like, and there's a culture kind of, so like, my middle school years, I was like the funniest kid there because they thought this kind of thing was funny. And then when I moved to high school, everyone was like, "What? That's like what bad kids do. Stop doing that." That. And so I was
Wild,
like, and I think I need, like, I went for like a physical today, and the nurse thought I was funny, and so I was going to be a lot sillier and make a lot more jokes. But I do feel kind of like, I don't know. I feel like if I would have had like my whole childhood in one place and in a place where people thought I was funny, maybe I would have like stuck with it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And because you also mentioned earlier, like getting into the high school years, that's when everybody has to start maybe thinking of what's real life starting to look like. Wait a second, I'm going to have responsibilities.
Money.
Yeah,
all that
exactly.
kind of
Like
thing,
I got to get a job. Am I going to college? All that sort of stuff. And you mentioned earlier that like you went through a handful of shifts where you did start to identify, all right, real life, adult life is around the corner.
Yeah.
Walk me through that process. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of weird. I feel like that zone, and I'm sure everybody has this to a certain degree, where you're trying to figure out like what pieces were natural and maybe I I think maybe the temptation is to go through and kind of pick apart like what were good things that I did and what were the bad choices. And then even as I'm like thinking of that, I'm thinking that doesn't seem like the right way to pick it apart. Like it's probably less simple than that. But okay. So I think one of the things that happened that maybe started to shift was I had a teacher who was a English teacher, and he was like super brilliant. He was into like transcendental literature and Emerson and Thoreau and like all of this stuff that I had no reference for. Like up to this point, the main thing I was thinking about was like Dumb and Dumber. Like that's what I was thinking about. And I think so he like had chosen a path. Like he had like left med school, became an English teacher out of like principle, and like I don't know. And everybody in the school was like, "Who is this guy? This guy's like a weird guy." I think he treated me like I was smart. And I think another piece of like ADHD I think is pretty common is there's so many like mental hurdles, like, working memory and just things that make you seem dumb, goofy, chaotic, clumsy, all those things. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it would take a certain type of person to recognize intelligence in people like that. And I think he just kind of noticed some kind of artistic leaning and some kind of intelligence. I don't know if it's like traditional intelligence, but some kind, multiple intelligences. I think he just, and I think I picked up on it. I was like, oh, okay, like, huh. And then I also just would like, he made like taking life seriously kind of seem cool. And I was like, okay. I like, this is a different way to think about going through life. And that was just one piece. And at that same time, I think I was trying to find my place in school, and I got into like indie music. And then also my mom, which is a big part of the stuff that I talk about when I do talks and stuff. So I'm completely comfortable talking about it. But my mom also, who I'm pretty sure has ADHD. ADHD is typically a genetic thing. And if I got it from anywhere, I got it from her. And I didn't live with her my whole life. And she left my family, left another family, ended up kind of rogue. Like we didn't really know where she was for a long time. And ended up with a drug addiction, abusive boyfriend, in the hospital with needed brain surgery, and all kind of all at once. And I think that also was kind of like a shock of the way I usually say it is like, at first when I was young, I loved being like her. And then slowly over time, it became like a curse. Okay. Because I was like, oh, this is like, if I don't get serious, this is going to be what's happening. Because I'm literally doing everything that she does. Like, I was just walking in that same direction. I think all of those things came together to maybe throw me off pursuing comedy in any serious way.
Yeah. Okay. So when you make that shift, and this might be a silly question, right? Hey, we're all figuring things out when we're 16, 17, 18, whatever. Like, do you feel like the new quote unquote serious path that you kind of like projected into? Yeah. Was there a part of you that was like, I really need to buckle down and life is so serious now? Or do you feel like you found new ways to kind of have that joy and have that happiness? Or was it just like, I'm just going to go and we're just going to kind of figure this out?
I mean, I think that for a good season, so I'll say this. I never lost being silly. I think that is just... Like, and as an example, like I moved to the UK, I went to school over there with my family. My dad moved over there at the same time. He got a transfer over there, and then we all just went over there and used it as an opportunity to go to college in the UK. and my older brother did as well. And I spent like, when I was at home, I spent like 30%, that might be a low estimate, in character. Like 30% of my time at home in character. Like that's, so I never lost that, but I do think that whereas that used to be the thing that I valued the most about myself, there was probably a big part of me that kind of, I don't know if I would say ashamed of it, but just thought it was maybe a waste or something.
Yeah. A little bit of that, like, oh, that was younger me.
Yeah,
I'm adult me now.
Yeah.
I like, it's still there, but no, I can't. That's not my thing anymore,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And you do comedy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you do improv.
Yeah.
And how did you get into that?
So literally, that comedy for me is literally just a last like calendar year thing.
Oh, really? Okay,
right. So
cool.
I have loved comedy forever.
Yeah.
One of my absolute favorite shows growing up. Whose Line Is It Anyway?
A great show.
Like literally obsessed with it. Just
Yeah.
didn't want to miss an episode growing. All this sort of stuff. And so it had always been in the back of my head of I absolutely love comedy, and I was also like a little too interested in like stand-up specials as well, even as like a 10 or 11-year-old. I'm like, oh, this is like 30-minute special on Comedy Central's on. I really want to watch it.
Yeah.
So just always fascinated with the world of entertainment in general, but definitely comedy. And for me, it was always just sort of that thing in the back of my mind where I would get to be funny, doing a lot of work in the creative and like filmmaking world and stuff like that. Cool. Plenty of opportunities to kind of get to play some characters, get to act here and there, get to do some skits. It was always kind of like little bite-sized pieces, right? For a little while, I got to do like a horror comedy podcast where I kind of got to like scratch that itch a little bit more, right? Play some characters and do some sketches and everything, but it never really solidified. And for me, it never really took shape until I made the improv comedy podcast that I make now, to where I was just like, I kind of don't know what other way to get into this world. Like, I'm gradually meeting more comedian friends and stuff like that, but it still seemed like well, that's their world. I'm over here.
Yeah, like an outsider.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. No one ever made me feel like that, but it's the imposter syndrome we all have, right? And so for me, I was like, well, I know how to podcast, and I think I know enough of improv that I could form like some sort of a structure of a show out of this. And then just started getting to do it. And that effectively kind of like opened up the door to now being like, oh, hey, I'm a part of the comedy scene. And that's really cool. And all the comedians because they're all incredible, everyone is like, yes, you are now a comedian. And because at first,
awesome.
I still, even when I started doing it, that imposter syndrome's still there, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yeah, but I just do like a comedy podcast, right? I'm making friends and all this sort of stuff, but I just do a comedy podcast. I'm like, no, you do comedy. You're a comedian, and you're popping up at shows more, and you're doing all this sort of stuff. You are in the world of comedy now. And so that's a relatively fresh thing for me.
That's cool.
That was kind of almost a little bit of a bucket list item for a while. It kind of just like took its place on that list for years, and I was like, again, getting to kind of dip my toe into it when I could, but there was never like a structured like avenue that's like, oh yes, do this, and this is how you become a comedian of some sort. So for me, it's a very new thing, but the passion had always been there. You know what I mean? Where it was always a thing that I wanted to try and find a way into it, but it just didn't click until that moment when it finally did.
Who are your guys growing up? Who are your people?
This is such a bad answer, but like
the worse, the better, in my opinion.
Kind
like
of
the weirder. I want to hear. Okay.
So it's bad because there's not specifically a list.
Okay.
Honestly, it was just sort of like kind of anybody. Like
you just liked comedy.
I did.
Yeah.
I really did. Outside of, again, the cast of Whose Line, being the absolute, like, those were my people.
Legends. Yeah.
As far as like stand up and stuff goes, it was just kind of everything.
Really?
Whenever there was a stand up special that was on, I was like, yes, whether it's something that's kind of like wacky and fun, like Dimitri Martin, or Anthony Jeselnik with super dark, very, very dark comedy, or even for a while, again, I'm from a Southern Ohio town, like when blue collar comedy was like the big thing. It was like, oh my god, it's on, so it's like and now looking back at that, like I haven't watched any of those in years, but I would venture to guess I'm not going to connect with them.
I don't know. I can't.
I can't speak on whether or not they do. I would just venture to guess the different type of person I am.
What it's like, actually.
There have been times I have scrolled past them on a streaming service, and I'm
You're like,
I
maybe.
want to know what this feels like now. And because it feels so like, no, I don't even give it a chance. It might still be funny.
That's the thing about stand-up, though, that's kind of what I love about it, is that it's similar to like classic storytelling structure. I feel like good jokes, they might not make you laugh in a timeless way, but I think there's a respect for, there's something timeless about a good joke. Like, even if it, like I said, even if it doesn't make you laugh, I can respect it. So I could imagine, I could just watch it for the craft, I think.
Yeah.
And for the cultural moment. I think that'd be interesting too. But
yes. I have wanted to venture down that road, and I just never am in the mood of
it's like,
all right.
I feel like you got to be in the mood to waste a night of your life.
Genuinely, yes. Like, I'm never in a get her done mood. You know what I mean? That's not really a thing I'm looking for.
Not anymore. There were times where you were, clearly.
One time I'm walking into 6th grade and everyone's like, get her done. I'm like, you're right, brother. Get her done. We might be rednecks if. So it's like,
that's so funny.
Vastly different now. But just in any of those worlds, like in any of the entertainment world, for me, it was always the attraction was the performance part of it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm also a gigantic fan of pro wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love it.
That's cool.
And it's like,
do you still watch it?
Oh, yes.
What's it like? I had that. I was like, when it was at the height, I was like 6th to 8th grade. So like, I knew like that was, and it was like NWO, that kind of season.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But, so that's about where my knowledge ends.
Right.
But I do think, I mean, just as a case study on humanity, it's such a fascinating thing. So yeah, what's it like these days?
Now, a lot cleaner. Than those days. Definitely. Oh, definitely.
What?
In the 90s, they were that was deemed like the Attitude Era is what that's deemed as. Now they're like a publicly owned company. There's a lot of like sponsors with everything. It's very commercialized.
Cleaner in
now.
what way? Every way?
People aren't walking around saying "suck it" every day. Like, it'll happen, but
I forgot about that.
People aren't coming out and they've
that's nuts.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot less like people aren't coming out and like dumping buckets of poo on people and whatever. There's different forms of wrestling all around the world. There's multiple companies, but as far as like WWE, the biggest one, it's just a lot. I would say more family friendly, which is strange to be like pro wrestling family friendly. It's like,
I get it. It's it's like it's like theater.
Oh, 100%.
So, like,
it is.
I get why it would go that way.
Yes.
It's interesting. Like, this is, as soon as I thought of this, it broke down. So it doesn't really hold, but there's something to it maybe where where sponsors, every line I wanted to go down, I thought, I don't want to get into that. But just thinking like the weird nature of sponsored media and how, versus the internet, like the internet is so uncensored.
Yes.
And then the things that are kind of, entertainment and mainstream media in some ways becomes more and more fabricated and clean in a way that there's this very bizarre kind of, what do you like? We're like, it's kind. I don't know. It's a weird thing in your brain where you're having to. You're full of it. You don't like. It's like we're pretending over there when we know everybody. All these people on the internet are just doing the craziest thing.
100%. And that is the strange thing. Yeah. It's like, I feel like back in the day, with using pro wrestling as the example, it's like back in the day, there was always a conversation like, well, what's real and what's not, and blah, blah, blah. And at some point you realize, well, the Undertaker is not an actual undead zombie wizard. He is in fact a person pretending to be that. And it's very entertaining when I see him on TV. And now, that whole fourth wall is completely shattered because people can see him attend a football game and they're like, hey, look, there's that old guy who's hanging out at the football game, right? But I also think when that comes to some of what you're talking about, when it comes to like the sponsorships and all sort of stuff, it is very strange because it's like, well, we see all this other stuff. We know what the world actually is, but sometimes I almost feel like that is the new version of, well, what's real in wrestling is because when they infuse real world, like hey, I'm a human being, and we all know I'm playing a character on TV, but my feelings were actually hurt about this thing. So this is the story we're going down now. Where back in the day it was, oh my God, the Undertaker's back from the dead.
Yeah.
It's so like in some way, I know that doesn't necessarily have to do with like sponsorships and all that sort of stuff, but like that barrier of the fourth wall via, you can see this person tweet about their lunch on the internet, and then like, well, they helped the old lady across the street today on Twitter, and now tonight I'm supposed to despise them as a person.
Yeah.
It has become so more clearly, this is theater and this is a show, but because there is still that like sport like element to it, it's almost treated as like, well, no, it is real. And it lives in this real strange world where it's like everybody knows what it is, but it still is this other thing too a little bit. And then when it comes to sponsorships and stuff, it's like, WWE is pretty big on like they don't feature blood anymore.
Oh, really?
If it happens, it happens.
Sure.
They usually try stitch some or close somebody up relatively quickly. But you go to like if you watch UFC or something, they're just they're absolutely battering everybody, and everybody's bleeding everywhere. But for some reason, WWE has toned down on that now.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is like, well, sponsorships, for new TV rights deals and all this sort of stuff. So I am not smart enough to really dissect the
cultural
anthropology what makes a sponsorship and what doesn't, because what you're sponsoring, what you're partnering with, why are you looking for a specific version of it? And then again, the internet is one thing, television is a whole other thing. Like, it's a very I feel like we could probably do a whole podcast on
yeah, I know we're going on some weird thing, but you get the UFC thing is really interesting too, because then you get this dividing line of like ultra clean versus like brutal, and I think you see that in media too, because I'm thinking like Game of Thrones, like everybody, I didn't actually watch Game of Thrones, but I know everybody watched it, and I'm just thinking about just what I know about it. I think, man, it's such a bizarre change, the way that culture has gone, of like this very like pushing the limits of what's acceptable for mainstream media, and then things that are just completely sanitized. It's weird. Yeah,
it is. It gets even stranger because now WWE and UFC are owned by the same parent company. Oh. So they are literally under the same umbrella now.
Yeah.
So it gets even stranger of like, I don't know what weird. Works over here and what works over there, but either way. It's probably a different, if you watched it today, probably a different world than what you're, but in my opinion, really, really, really great.
Nice.
Like genuinely.
Did you never fall off?
I never did. I wasn't one of those people, man. Awesome. I literally, probably at times what comedy felt like to you, that's always been wrestling for me.
Yeah.
Like I've loved comedy forever.
Yeah.
Wrestling was like the thing though. Like
always.
I would go in and out of, like, I used to draw a ton as a kid, and like everyone around me was like, artist when you grow up. Yes, effectively have become that, but not, I'm not illustrating and all this sort of stuff, right? But it was like that, or like skateboarding or whatever it is, that like passions that were very, very strong when they showed up, but also fell off at some point.
But
the interest and love in wrestling has absolutely been a set thread through everything, and I have probably referenced.
Why do you think that is?
I really don't know. There is something to me that, like, when I look at it from an entertainment standpoint, my favorite form of entertainment, 100%. If somebody was like, you can never watch a movie again, or you can watch, pro wrestling I'd be like, I would probably always choose pro wrestling. I really would.
So funny.
And because even when I was a kid, I wasn't like, oh my God, this is so real. I was like, I have a feeling I know what this is.
Yeah.
Because I can also watch this like documentary about like the Hardy Boys and how they grew up, and I see who they are, right?
Yeah.
But I also think it's like it is the theatrics and the storytelling element. Like for me, it was just this golden nugget of a form of storytelling that, again, it's real, but it's not real, but it technically is real life and a little bit of a sport, but it's also theater and predetermined, and it's just this very unique version of all of these things. And I don't know. I just got hooked from
I think I like what you're picking up there, because I think it reminds me of I like all forms of art that interest me are pretty much, they kind of center on an individual, and I really do like the projection of, this is like who I am, like this is the piece of me that I put into the art. Mm-hmm. So in terms of style, or I've always been interested in like the roles that actors choose, and then the way that musicians kind of formulate what the vibe of an album and kind of a tour is going to be. And it's the same thing of like finding your creative identity is such a huge piece of pro wrestling. And I love what you said about like how these like personal anecdotes spiral into the professional storylines. Yeah, that's all. I like that. That's interesting.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
This episode is sponsored by Teal, the brand aimed at helping creatives get out of the dark when it comes to the business end of creativity. Now, their goal is to create tools that organize and empower creative leaders to grow their productions and projects. So, how do they do that? Well, they've got a handful of plug-and-play ready digital assets to help you on the ground level of your business. From a profit and loss automator to help actively track and fine-tune your finances, the simple budgeter tool to help you break down and build out more appropriate budgets for your projects, or the Pitch Like a Pro kit that includes things like a discovery call outline, pre-production kit, pitching tool set, and even more. All developed and based off the many true hurdles that entrepreneurs and creatives of many kind are met with in trying to just streamline and systematize their business. But wait, there's more. If you want a more direct experience on how to clarify your business goals and really focus in on landing healthy budgets, aligning with your clients, feeling less burned out, and simply want to gain more confidence and clarity in your journey, well, Teal offers one-on-one and group coaching sessions aimed at authentic conversations just built around self-discovery, and you can join the waitlist for these sessions anytime. So for everything you need to purchase or to look into any of the assets that I listed, or to simply get in contact with Teal for any of the coaching sessions, for more information on the entire coaching process and what Teal looks and feels like in general, you can visit tealcolor.com. That's tealcolor, T-H-E-A-L color.com. And check this out. If you do go purchase anything, use the code WYDHPOD during checkout for a special discount on your purchases. Teal, being organized is being creative. Yeah. So yeah, it for some reason has just stuck around. Again, even to this day, there are so many things that I reference from pro wrestling, or there's a lot of ideas that have spawned from pro wrestling. Like, oh, what if I turn that into this and did this?
Love that.
Tons of influence in that sense.
That's cool.
And again, it's like comedy was a similar thing. It's like it's always stayed there, but it just wasn't as passionately burning of a, oh my God, I love this more than anything.
Yeah.
And so like for you, like again, we were talking about like the idea that like comedy was there, it was an interest, you would love to be on Saturday Night Live, all this sort of stuff. Then we're getting to, okay, life is changing, life decisions are being made, we're moving to UK, all that sort of stuff. What was like in that time frame, whether it's like once I got back to the US, then things changed or whatever, what was the next like prominent thing for you that you really uncovered? Because I know you also said music popped up.
Yeah.
Like what was the thing where you were like, okay, I can add this to my identity?
I got super into music. I discovered this, a friend of mine got me into a band called Modest Mouse, where I just got super into them. I think when I first heard them, this is like now the world seems so small in a way that's hard to describe. Even like when we were, even like in 2005 to 2010, I felt like you could stumble into a pocket of the internet that you did, and it's like a whole culture that you didn't know existed. And that would happen kind of frequently. Where now I feel like even if you don't know, like I'm not going to do it because it's dangerous, but I could rattle off like 5 subcultures that I don't really know what they are, but I know they exist because I feel like we're just constantly swimming in every piece of the world at all times. And then there's no surprise either. Like I never feel surprised by like, whoa, this whole no, it's very rare. Whereas then, like growing up in, the southern half of Indiana, I just didn't have access to very much music outside of what was on the radio or on MTV. And so like that opened up a whole world, and I got at first, like when I first started listening to that kind of music, it sounded like noise. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I was just curious about it. And I just bought records and just started kind of obsessively listening until it really clicked. And then I got obsessed with, there was a whole visual art component to it with band posters and that kind of thing. And honestly, I think I've always had, my dad is like a pretty classic businessman. And then my mom is like, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, a classic artist. Not that I don't love that about her, but that being an artist in the world that we live in is not easy. And so I think that Venn diagram has always been just very balanced for me, especially from that time. I don't think anyway, I think I saw an opportunity to apply the type of creativity that I think I had. And I was like, these designers seem like they're working. They feel like that it looks like a job I could do, and it seems kind of endlessly fascinating. Like I'm deeply curious about this whole world. And so I went super deep. I went to school for design and illustration and kind of, went hard into that for a few years.
Now, I know a handful of friends who went to art school and then left art school absolutely hating doing any sort of graphic design or illustration or anything that they went for. What was that feeling? I mean, clearly we're sitting here today and I know a lot of what you've done since then, but what did that feel like for you? Was there any of those moments where you're like, I'm being taught creativity, I don't know if I like it? Or were you just like, nope, never felt it, it was rad? And
I think I was, I think there were some issues with this, but I was lucky enough to go to a program. Part of the reason I wanted to go to the UK when my family moved over there was I knew I'd be going into their university, which is post college, what they call college, and it meant that there's no general studies. It's just going to be the thing you're focused on. Wow. So I was like, this is a dream come true, because I really wanted to be done with math.
Yeah, I would have went to college if that were the case.
I was like, I'm going. I don't care what it is, where it is. And for better or for worse, I think it was mostly good. It was really just like 3 years, and it was 3 years. So I got a bachelor's degree in 3 years. So just kind of lucked out in that way.
Yeah.
But those 3 years were like borderline independent study. Like literally and I even switched from illustration to design because I'd noticed that the designers were able to kind of interpret the brief any way that they wanted. And so I thought I can make pictures and draw and get away with it over there and kind of do it however I want. And even I think I had I think the stuff with my mom, I don't think I really fully had a philosophy around this that was working until maybe my mid-20s. But I knew there can't be a plan where I'll just stick at something I don't want to do. I just knew it. And even now, I think people who aren't ADHD, I think hear that and they think it's privilege, and I am privileged in plenty of ways, but I could tell you what my mom became. That wasn't privilege. That was just her life tanked hard. And I'm not saying I'm just like her, but in a lot of ways I am. And so I just knew like if I don't, and so whereas, I taught a couple classes at the art school here when I first moved here. And I know a lot of students that gave up creative stuff after they got out. And in a way, there's even part of me now that wishes I could do that, because it's not because it's easier, but just because it's difficult in a whole bunch of ways to make creativity your work. Mm-hmm. And so I think the reason why I didn't drop off, and even why I didn't drop off in school, like even in school, I constantly was, even when I wasn't really allowed to reinterpret the brief, I just did because I knew I needed to. So like the last project I did was a thing that became my first book called the Indie Rock Coloring Book. And I did that for a project in school. And it was so kind of ill-fitting to the final project that I got a D. But then I also, a year later, published it as a book. So like that was kind of that thing of, I was lucky enough to have gotten traumatized by my mom and thought, I just had a fire. I was like, I have to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because if I don't, I'm going to ruin people's lives. Like I'm going to ruin the people's lives who I encounter in the way that she has. I could just see her life became like this rippling effect of just destruction from misery and inability to kind of get on with stuff. So I think I had that. And so even after school, like I graduated in the recession, I was doing really kind of trendy illustration, helped me get some jobs early on. Like I said, I published that book, and yeah, like things were going well for a minute. And then by the time I quit the part-time job I had, like the recession hit, the trends that I was a part of kind of died off a little bit, and it all disappeared. And so even then, I think I credit just knowing that I needed to figure out a creative life to survive, help me get through that period of time.
Yeah. So what does that balance look like? Is that like, well, like, you know, there was a recession going on and there's all these different things changing. So I went and I had, you know, this as a day job. And then I was, you know, making sure that I was designing and illustrating as much as possible on the side. Or did it still just stay that spark of, I just continued to find any sort of artistic endeavor that I could?
I mean, so the way that it kind of went, I tried to do whatever I could for a little while. And then eventually for like 6 months, I couldn't get any work. And the one thing I think I had going for me at that time, I got married young. We had kids young. I had a kid like very shortly after college. And, but the thing that I did do was I kept my overhead extremely low. Like our rent was super low. Like we didn't make any big purchases. We were driving one terrible van that we had. Like, you know, because I just knew I needed to figure out how to not loathe the work that I was doing, because I knew that would lead to addiction. Like I was already addicted to plenty of, you know, like food, and I was already up into that time. I smoked cigarettes for like 5 or 6 years. Up to that time, I'd quit right around then. But I kept all my overhead really low. And when all of the illustration stuff stopped, I gave up for a little bit. Like I even took my website down. The only thing I could find for work was working at this youth shelter. And I was happy to work there because it was with people, it was with teenagers. And so that's kind of more conducive to creativity than like being a cashier or something like that. And so I worked there, but I didn't know if you worked there, you have to pick up shifts at the juvenile detention center. And I always say like, it was very ironic because I had spent all of my time since I was a teenager trying to avoid traditional employment because it felt like a jail, to end up in traditional employment in a jail.
Incredible.
That was like, because I had to work part-time jobs. Like my parents made me do that. And I just hated it. I feel so nauseous. I don't like the indoor lighting and the just being in the same place for that long and all that stuff. And yeah, whatever. The math, all that stuff just made me feel ill. And I did that from when I was 14 to probably 20. Like I put in my time doing all this crap. And so I got that job and, I did that for a little while. I didn't mind the youth shelter stuff. I almost actually took a job in social work that kind of, leapt off of that. And there was actually like a real moment. I remember talking to my dad when I got offered this job, as like a social worker, kind of at the bottom rung. And I was really weighing up, like, am I going to pursue illustration again, or am I going to do social work and really just kind of pack up and forget about the illustration career? And ultimately, I think I just decided that even though I can be good with people and I really care about people and they're interesting, as a thing to do for your work, I think I ultimately just felt like I would probably still end up just unhealthy because of a lot of the ways that, the demands of that kind of work would put on me. And so I turned down that job and kind of continued to pursue illustration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that definitely a thing we all know is that,
Yeah.
Making it as a creative and artist of any kind in the world is often very difficult.
Yeah.
Walk me through, because we're doing it today,
Yeah.
right? We're
Yeah.
here, we're making it happen. How does that end up working?
Yeah.
Like,
I think so. Here's the way I think about maybe the most pivotal moment. And obviously, there were a lot of different things going on. But I think that looking back from 18 to 25, I think the thing that was really in my way was I was trying to be the opposite of my mom, right? And when I got stuck and the recession hit and I was doing this work at the youth shelter, juvenile detention center, and I was really struggling, I started really trying to figure out how does one build a creative practice? How do the people that have, done what they did? And I started like consuming tons of like artist talks, TED Talks, Creative Mornings talks, that kind of stuff, reading tons of interviews, and watching videos with like my favorite artists, anything I could get my hands on, even like older stuff, like interviews with Charles Schultz and people like that. And I was just trying to figure out like, what is it that they did? Like what, if there's anything to it or any patterns to it. And I also started kind of compiling their work in folders. So this was like pre-Pinterest. Like I'm just like trying to, it's like Charlie Day, that GIF where he's got all the like that's me.
Yeah.
That was like me at that time, just like the detective with the string and the pictures and everything. And I think that I started to see myself in those people. Like people like Aaron Draplin, who's a designer. Any designer probably is familiar with his work. Lives out in Portland, but he's from Michigan, and he was really unashamedly Midwestern. And so I remember just feeling like, okay, well, maybe that part of myself isn't so bad. And I think the more stuff I consumed, the more I realized like, oh, a big part of being an artist is loving yourself. And then now I say, the way I think about it is like, you can't make work that you love. You can't make art, which is self-expression, if you hate the thing that it's an expression of. You have to be interested in yourself enough to dive in and take yourself seriously and care about and think there's interesting stuff in there to even put in the time to make any work. And I think that it wasn't until, so I was like stringing these things together and feeling like, okay, well, maybe this part of myself isn't so bad. Maybe that part of myself isn't so bad. And then I think I really like ran out of creative juice. I was also like trying to continue to make work, but I was like running on the fumes of these talks and these interviews and stuff. And then when I got really desperate, I watched this talk by a guy, I think his name is Joseph Wu, and he's an origami artist. And his talk was about depression, origami, and ADHD. And I think I put that off because I didn't know the artist. And then also I think I'd always thought that I was ADHD. When I was in first grade, there was a kid in my class named Jeremy, and I thought, this guy knows what's going on. Like we would like run around the gym and just talk nonsense and be absurd. And like one time he stopped to go get his meds from the office, And I was like, oh, what's wrong, man? Are you okay? And he's like, oh, I'm just hyper. And I was like, oh, I thought that was just being awesome. I thought that was a great thing. I didn't know this needed medication.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's weird. And then when I was in high school and I was, like I said, kind of prior to my mom's like blow up, I was walking completely in her footsteps and doing drugs and trying to get out of everything all the responsibilities I could get out of, and really struggling at school and work and everything. And me and my buddy got Adderall from somebody, and I joke that we both did crazy things that night. We went home and took it separately. And next day he's like, dude, you'll never believe this. Like, I stayed up all night, like watched the sun rise. I was like shaking. It was crazy. I was like, dude, you're never going to believe this. You know what I did? My homework. And I did it efficiently. I was like, that's weird. Like, but I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't be like, so I was doing recreational drugs.
Right. Yeah.
And the funniest thing, I might need them. That's not going to work. So I just kind of, and I also think that that I knew whatever this stuff was, this is what my mom is. Mm-hmm. And from, like age 18, my kind of world, I adopted a kind of negative psychology, negative philosophy of the way that I'm going to get where I need to go is to be the opposite of who I am. And I think that ADHD thing opened up a different worldview. And nowadays I know that this is kind of a thing that also kind of happened in the 90s in psychology, where positive psychology kind of branched off. Not to be confused with like toxic positivity. It's a different thing. It's actually just a point of view that instead of, for the whole time that psychology had existed up into that moment, it was very much about like, we're going to diagnose what's wrong with you as the starting point, versus positive psychology is just starting on the other side, just saying like, let's find what's unique about you for good. Like what, and so I think that shift, I don't think I could have become a creator had I not started to think of myself as something positive to cultivate, because I grew up in the Midwest and in the Bible Belt, and I'm certain that there are plenty of religious folk that have a positive psychology. I'm sure that's the case, but I also know from experience that it's not commonly the perspective. It starts more with, instead of starting with the the first book of the Bible and being like, you're a good thing, like, oh, I saw that it was good, that kind of thing. It really starts with original sin and you're that kind of thing. And so I think it wasn't until when I really started to dig into ADHD, and I was seeing my mom in the literature and I was seeing myself, I started to realize that all the ways that she failed were not because of who she is. It was because she was trying to be something she wasn't. Like, she was never going to succeed at those things. And all of the stories that I was told about, like, why she was bad started to have a different light. Like, I was always told, like, she can't keep a job, and basically just as a character flaw. And come to find out later, like, I asked my dad about it, and he was like, she would try to waitressing, but she would like lose a lot of money and like not do the math on the fly, even though she's smart. Like, it was something about the chaos of that. And I had the same experiences, like losing money as a cashier and that kind of stuff. And so, I think diving into that, I realized like, oh, I wonder what it would be like if I tried to, the way I think about it now, and I'm working on like material for new episodes of my show and I don't know, different things, books and stuff, where I went from trying to be the opposite of her to trying to be more like her than she let herself be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that was the big turning point for me.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there that
I'm actually
love.
currently like working through a lot of that. So sorry to just kind of, drop it, but
that's great.
I'm working on a lot of creative projects where because I went and interviewed her last year. And so, so there's a lot there that, and I couldn't think of a way to answer it in a way that was more simple.
No,
So
that's
there you go.
great. No, I told you earlier, this is a place for just take it wherever you want to go. But I literally love so much of what you described in there. In a lot of ways, I have a somewhat similar relationship with my mom, actually, and
really?
a lot of kind of the world that she has found herself in, and a lot of things that have happened, and a lot of things like that, where I can look at that and kind of, try to navigate that, and of course be like, okay, what am I doing? What am I not doing? But also really like, what did she do? What did she not do? What are the real, it's not just like, things happen and, whatever it is. Something I'd be interested in, like there's this saying that I love that like what happens to us matters less than our reaction to it. When you hear, do you feel like you tend to look at things like that of like, at least for me, hearing how you've kind of dissected some of this stuff is you did kind of take the ownership of things can happen, and yes, we're going to make different decisions and we're going to learn from the positives and negatives of those things. But at least as an outsider, hearing so much of what you have explained here is like, I almost do hear that a little bit in this. Like, do you think nowadays, like, do you sit and kind of look at, okay, things can happen to us and they can be pretty bad, or they can be good, or they can be great, whatever.
Yeah.
But the power, whether negatively or positively, that thing has really dictates how we respond to it. Like, does that make sense?
I mean, it definitely makes sense. And I think it sounds pretty stoic, and I definitely like a lot of stoicism. I don't think it comes naturally to me. My dad is very stoic. He's never consumed any stoic philosophy or anything, but it just kind of like runs through his veins. Like that is who he is. And it's been a really good influence on me. But I'm such an emotional person, and I take everything that way. And I also kind of feel like where my dad is a type of person that I think he has a type of brain that has a lot of control over the way he reacts. I think he, doesn't tend to get real dysregulated and like, all that. And so all that to set up to say, I would probably think of it, even though it might be the same conclusion, I identify with more of like, the little I know of like Epicurean philosophy, which I think people that know that line of thinking, it kind of gets a rap for being hedonism, where it's like, from what I understand, it's like driven by being happy, being the max amount of happiness. Like life is about being as happy as you can, as much as you can. And so the common, I think, misconception of that particular line of philosophy is that it is like hedonism, where you're just like going from pleasure to pleasure to pleasure and just nonstop, that kind of thing. Whereas what I believe it really is it takes a much more macro view. And it says, okay, sure, I could in the short term, smoke 2 packs a day and have a great time. That won't actually lead to the maximum amount of happiness in my life over the long term, because I might die an early death. And so, or I might hurt people with secondhand smoke and I actually feel all this guilt. So like it's a little bit more of a complex thing. I don't know if I completely stand by this, but that's kind of how I go through things. So I think that rather than, I think I do exactly what you're saying, but I just think of it a little bit differently. Like when bad things happen, or when things don't go the way I want them to, or I'm faced with some kind of obstacle or challenge, I think, do I want to make this worse for myself, or do I want to make this thing better for myself given the circumstance? And I usually try to take and I think that macro view was directly linked to watching my mom's decision making, because I was doing the same things that she was doing. And I think at the time I just felt like she would buy me cigarettes. And like, I was just like, that's dope. Like, this is great. I'm loving it. And it wasn't until all that hit the fan that I started thinking, it wasn't that I was completely like, oh, this is great. I love smoking and there's no consequence. It wasn't that. But I did think like, oh, I'm like one of these people. I don't think this is a great way to like, I don't want to make it out worse than it was, but I think I was I'm like a dirty kid. I'm like one of those kids that, you know, does drugs when they're 13 and whatever. Like, and I think when all that stuff happened to her, and it was really a traumatizing thing, and her whole life was a traumatizing thing to me because she left me when I was a toddler. I'm sure I have all these attachment issues because of that. But I think that moment made me just kind of strategically see that end and reverse engineer, like, this is how you end up there. And then I'm watching her in her 40s and thinking she might be around for another 40 years and they're going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible, pain, guilt, health issues, poverty. And I think, yeah. And again, I think that Epicurean thing is a very pragmatic take on ADHD, that ADHD is driven by stimulation. It's about how can I make life a stimulating experience for good. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, no. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm more so asking just like, hey, what is your perspective on
Sure.
this thing? And 100%, yes. I also would be very interested to know, how have you handled creative burnout? Because we touched on this a little bit earlier of like, and we hit those moments where it's like, wait, is this as fun as it once was? Especially, you know, dealing with those sort of things of, you know, whether it's ADHD or like, what am I being stimulated with? And does this feel like a high or a low? Or also everything we were just talking about of life doesn't always go according to this imaginary plan that we sometimes place for it, right?
Yeah.
Things can pop up where you can be like, wow, this whole self-employment thing is really starting to work. And then one thing can go wrong, and that could effectively, you know, whether that does turn into burnout or just a cascade of other things. So I'd love to hear like your experience with like creative burnout as a whole.
I've got so much experience with creative burnout. I can't even tell you, because I think, you know, it's so much easier for people with ADHD to get burnout.
Okay.
Like that's just like a pretty known fact that experts will talk about. Like this is kind of why that is. For instance, like typically, like I brush my teeth. Well, these days, I don't. When I go to the dentist, it's a good checkup. Okay. One cavity, maybe. All right. I'm just defending myself because what I'm about to say may make you think otherwise, where brushing your teeth for most ADHD people is a chore. It's a thing where, you know, I've heard like people say, I don't know how true this is because I'm not a neurotypical person, but I've heard like when a neurotypical person goes to brush their teeth, what a habit means for them is that they just go do it. They're not thinking about it. They're not. Like, I'm thinking about it. Before I brush my teeth at night, I'm thinking, I've got to brush my teeth. I don't want to brush my teeth. I don't want to do that again. It's so freaking boring. Like, that's what I'm thinking.
I do the
every
same
night.
thing. Yeah, wow.
Oh, it's so freaking annoying. I hate it, okay?
Yeah.
And, okay, I'm trying to remember why I'm talking about, what were you talking, oh, creative burnout.
Yes.
Okay, so they talk about how, so that's that energy, that's your willpower. I'm using it on everything. Everything that I do is willpower. And so when you said, you know, when things get bad and it's not working, sure, that leads to tons of bad, you know, depression, struggle, self-doubt, all really bad things, anxiety, you know, I've experienced all that. However, on the flip side, you know, when things really, really work out, like I'm so time blind. I'm like, I do think for an ADHD person, I've done a lot of work to figure out how to meet deadlines pretty well. I think I deliver pretty well and do a good job, but it's difficult. And and so when things are really working, I can be in my worst zone. when I have the most opportunities coming my way, not to say don't send me opportunities. I have 3 children. But yeah, I get in, the first couple of picture books I did were brutal for me because of the amount, it's not like an editorial illustration where you're like, hey, I need this by Friday. And it's one illustration. It's like, it's a very, any kind of book is a long planning process with a lot of factors that are not natural for me. And so it took me a long time to get a hold of that. And I would say the past couple that I've done were definitely the best, like the best version of that. But I just went through a big thing of like 6 months of doing a lot of talks and tour dates and stuff with the kids book. And I just got the last few weeks, I've just been in, not the past 2 weeks, I've been recovering. Before that, I was in severe creative burnout. And this is where my dad's training kicks in. And the thing that I say the most about my dad and his kind of stoic take is I once, when I was really struggling early on, I called him and I was like, hey man, I'm struggling with this. It's so freaking hard. Why is life so hard? And he was like, yeah, life is hard. And I was like, yeah, and it sucks. And he was like, no, like life is hard, but it doesn't suck. Like hard and bad are not the same thing. And that was such a massive shift because I think that correlates directly to things like the growth mindset. And I think the growth mindset comes it's very unnatural to creators for a bunch of reasons. I think we want ease. We want what we think of flow as mastery, ease, just an outpouring, like whatever. Whereas even flow has to have a degree of challenge. And so I think that, his kind of attitude, I also think like we have a lot of narratives around creativity that are very fixed mindset by definition, like fixed mindset being talent based. Like you either have it or you don't have it. Like that's fixed. Whereas growth is like, oh, if you put work to it, if you figure out some of the things, you keep work, like you can figure it out and you can get good at it. You can get better over time. You can actually grow in this thing. That the talent thing says things should be easy. And when they're not easy, you're doing the wrong thing. You know what I mean? And so that kind of hard, not bad has helped me get through a lot of creative burnout because that's the biggest part for me is that when I get in that very low creative zone, I feel like I did something wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. Like this is wrong. I took a wrong turn. This isn't the right work for me. Like all of those things, that's my natural feeling. And I think I've learned to have a little bit of distance from those emotions and kind of just be like, okay, I see all of it. I see the panic. I see the, dread of this zone that you're in and not being able to see the finish line and all that. But also just know, like in retrospect, most of the time when you get through this, you're kind of glad you went through it and you're okay. Mm-hmm, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really want your thoughts on navigating, I'll say the world, I more so mean the internet world.
Yeah.
Being an artist, a creative of any kind in today's modern setup.
Yeah.
Where we are all, battling algorithms and we're all like trying to figure out how to get stuff to be seen. And even if it's not about the views, you still would like your stuff to be shared. And how that leads into effectively a burnout of like, wow, I'm kind of tired of trying this thing. And then ultimately trying to figure out like, well, does this thing make me happy? Am I enjoying life? And that's ultimately, it'll attract the right people. Cool. Let me release some of that. Like, I know I just said about a billion different things, but my main question is,
it's great. It made me think of a lot of things, but yeah.
I would love your take, how you've navigated your experience with, especially, I'm going to preface this a little bit more, especially, so much of your story that we talked about earlier, you have you saw more of like, I don't know, you I feel like got into, and if I'm wrong, obviously correct me, but like I feel like you started to get into the creative world like pre algorithms and social media everywhere and everything. And so you've also seen, like, yes, I grew up with it as well, but like you've also got a take on what that has looked like and changed effectively into now, where when I really started getting into creative work, it was right when Facebook was like becoming a thing. So it was like right in the dying days of like coding a cool theme on MySpace. And then it became, and that was one of my initial interests, was marketing and branding and how that looked on, well, what's a Facebook page look like? Let's make it look cool, like these bigger brands and oh my gosh, all this other stuff. So it's like growing with it. I really want your take on just what it feels like, what your thoughts are on just being an artist, a creative of any kind in today's modern world where everything exists on the internet.
I think there's three things, and again, ADHD, working memory, I don't have it. I literally, my daughter has ADHD too, and I tell her, the way to get through this is just say, you don't have a memory. You just act as if you don't, because you don't. So make sure you're just externalizing it all the time because you don't have any ability to remember anything. So I'll just say, I'm going to talk about a TV thing. These are for myself. $1 billion tech thing, and then a product thing. I'll see if I can do that. The first thing is, I'm going to switch it around. The TV or the tech billionaire thing was what I labeled it. I too, just like every person, I'm battling the fact that there are billions and billions of dollars being spent to make, I think you just think about, I've been thinking about social media like channels. So there's HBO, there's Nickelodeon, there's CBS, whatever. They're channels, okay? But they're spending all of this money partially to convince creators to make infinite amounts of work for free. They're not paying creators that money. They're paying teams of people that can create the kind of psychology that will make you obsessively give over the best creative energy you have to their apps without paying you. They're literally, juggernauts, huge compared to an HBO, paying nothing for what's on their channel, right? Virtually. Spotify is the same. Like the amount of musicians that are killing themselves to get onto playlists and whatever when there is no money on Spotify. Like, okay, so what do you do? Because first of all, you have like, and by the way, it's really hard. I don't think I'm like, this is what you do. It's easy. Just do this. No, it's not that. Yeah. This is even just the psychology of yourself overcoming what you're up against is insane. And so it's insane for me all the time. I have to continually check my mind and think about why am I doing what I'm doing and have a plan. And so, you have all this stuff coming at you to get you to put your best of your best stuff into this place for free for pretty much nothing. And so you got that. That's just the preface. But the second thing is, I think I've really been attracted to, I am aware of like, there are elements of what we're dealing with, the likes of which have never been seen. I know that is true. There are some very unprecedented things that we're like experiencing. I think that's true for sure. But I think that, the evolution of the human brain, it's been the same for 200,000 years. Like it's the same thing. And so the patterns are so freaking similar. And so I think Instagram's move to just completely copy TikTok because they know this is going to keep people sucked in here for the max amount of time, see the max amount of ads. I think it was really the death blow of social media because when that happened, if you take a zoom out, I think you realize like, it became the most lowest common denominator type of TV. It became America's Funniest Videos, infomercials, televangelists. That's it. That's what social media is now. So yes, it is it is mass media, and maybe that's what they want. I'm sure that'll pay dividends for a bunch of reasons. There's a reason those things exist. They prey on our instinctual animal level, but we always want to be more than that. We always want culture. We want art. We aspire to higher things, and like the next generation will not be cool with that. They don't want to just watch infomercials. Like nobody, like, you know what I mean? They're not going to just be happy watching the Home Shopping Network because it's hijacking our psychology. They're going to watch the zombies and be like, that does not look cool. That looks super lame. That's why they're making fun of us. So they're going to come in and do something totally different. And I think, if you saw creators spending all of their time making all of their work to put it on a commercial on C-SPAN, you'd be like, don't do that. The people aren't looking for what you have there, right? So I think it's going to have a massive shift. All right. So the only thing I think that has any like strategy to it is I think it's good to remember that there are all these levels to the relationship you have with the people that love your work and are fans of your work and support what you do. The marketers are going to call it a customer journey, but it's really a relationship. And I think it's important to have an understanding of those tech companies want you to optimize everything for the lottery that is going viral. They want you to optimize because that gets you to make your most wide appealing, rapidly consumed content. And they want as much of that as they can. It doesn't actually serve artists. And that's the other reason, like the way that they copied it, people don't follow people like they used to, right? You don't even want to see your followers. When you're like consuming mindless videos, which I do, I'm not if I find a follower in there, I'm like, oh no, I don't want to see that. Like, that's not what I'm there for, right? And so, you have to, the thing I think you have to be mindful about is do not do all of your stuff just to get new eyeballs. That's what they want you to do. Instead, I know so many people that got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people following them or seeing their stuff on TikTok, but they didn't have the rest of the links of the chain. They don't even have a product. There's nothing, they can't do anything with those eyeballs because they were only focused on getting discovered and thinking that, well, once that happens, then I'll figure it out. But you can't. You can't go that way. You really have to build it the other way.
Yep. I have tried my best to settle into a place where I've tried so hard to focus on my real life being the good thing.
Yeah.
And now I use social media as an extension to spotlight some things, to share some creations, to whatever, like trying to use social media in the most social way that we still can, right? Because yes, I'll scroll just as much as anybody, sure. and sure, but I really do try to be pretty conscious of I don't want to I use TikTok sparingly, right? And people are like, "Oh, I scroll TikTok all day the other day." Like, don't you? And I'm like, honestly, not really.
Trap.
Like,
it's a trap.
I truthfully I'll go in and I'd say in the last year I just allowed my TikTok to algorithmically figure me out, where I was like, all right, I'll let you know that I like spooky things and wrestling and creative, whatever. Give me these things. I just did that for it, right?
Yeah.
And I'll kind of go in, I'll get a quick dose, and then I'm like, all right, I want to go live life. I want to go do something, right? And I'm not saying that's super easy or whatever, but there was a handful of years as a creative person where I absolutely fell into the trap of I want all the likes, I want the followers, I want all this sort of stuff. And then at some point you realize this is not what any of this is about.
Yeah.
And for me, I had a direct example because last year around this time exactly, my Meta account got hacked and deleted. So, everything on the internet that I had been for the last decade wiped, gone. And there's no way to get that stuff back. They do not they do not care. There's no customer support.
No.
But
Which is also wild.
which is insane, right? Biggest social media platforms, in the world relatively, and they have no communication whatsoever. But the point was, while that stuff was gone, I couldn't be posting and sharing and all this sort of stuff. However, real life continued during that time frame. I locked in like new sponsorship deals for this show during that time.
Yeah.
I signed on new clients for new projects during that time without social media. And so, not that that was like the deciding factor for me. I had already been, for the last handful of years, being like, I don't like this social media chase anymore. I want to use it as like some form of I really like writing and just like kind of brain dumping and sharing emotions and stuff. So I'm going to use it as a public journal and a living portfolio for me to share things that I enjoy and that I think are cool, because I like them and I think they're cool, not because please, all of you, think this is cool. Like,
algorithm gods.
yeah,
Bless
it's like,
me.
do I want people to think this conversation that you and I are having right now, do I want a bunch of people to think it's cool? Sure. But at the end of the day, and I'm so sorry for those who maybe listen to multiple episodes, I say this all the time, but like, my value in this, we win because I got to meet you and we got to sit down and have a cool conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
It is bonus to me that we get to share this experience that we're having with other people. They get to listen and view it at home.
Yeah.
And maybe they attach to something that someone says and they're like, whoa, I learned something. I felt something that was entertaining or educational in some way. Amazing.
Yeah.
Those are all bonuses,
Yep.
right? And even for me in creative ventures, the most that I can find that, yes, I need to make money. Yes, I got to keep myself alive. We got to have the careers and the business side and all that sort of stuff. But the more room that I have for genuine excitement and joy and happiness and fulfillment and all these sort of things, if I can do those, I'm good. Yeah. I don't need that IV, stuck into me anymore of like, did this get 500 likes or 50?
Yeah.
Because we all know that that's changing. Everybody complains nowadays of like, oh, my likes on Instagram used to be 500 and now they are 50. Sure, absolutely same. But I can't really control that.
No.
Because I also don't want to play the game, the one that you were speaking of earlier, right? I don't want to be an influencer.
Yeah.
I don't. Am I fine influencing people based off of maybe some cool things I do or something like that? Great. Positive influence in a natural way, I'm down with. But I don't want to sit and have to feed a machine and do all this sort of stuff, get burnout, be unhappy, ultimately just to sit and say that I have 50,000 Instagram followers, that I have 100,000 Instagram, whatever, because there's also been plenty of creative friends in multiple different fields, comedians, artists, musicians of any kind, have had that somewhat viral moment. They get the numbers, they get the views, then they immediately are like, nothing really changed for me. And even if it did, there's usually a time after that where they're like, oh, this feels like a game now that I have to keep up with. Like, people are commenting and demanding that I serve them the piece of content that the algorithm showed them to begin with. And when I do something different, now they're angry at me. And, oh my gosh, now they didn't like this piece of art more. I filmed these types of comedy skits, and that's what everybody liked me for. So now when I do my real stand-up material, no one cares. Oh my gosh. Yep. Well, that's the hard part, right? Of the algorithm being like, hey, this thing, everybody really likes this thing. And if you don't keep doing that thing, you're doing it wrong. You mentioned this earlier, right? It's all a part of the creative process of like hitting that, like, oh my God, am I doing it wrong? And I've heard the conversations and had the conversations with many, again, creatives of different types where they do that.
Yeah.
They find that somewhat viral thing that tends to work. They get a bunch of followers, they get a bunch of views, and they still might enjoy that thing that made them viral, and they might continue to make that, for the sake of the example, that same style of comedy skit, right? Yeah. But then when they're like, man, but the recording of that really cool joke that I really love for my stand-up set, it didn't really get the views, and no one really commented on it. No one really cares about it.
Yep.
It's exactly what you're saying of like, well, how does that translate into the real world? Yeah. Are the people really showing up, or did they really like to throw some flame emojis on that one piece of something? And so that's why, like, I feel like it's vastly important to not make that a part of our identity. It can't be. Like, and I know that's easy to say. It wasn't easy for me to break through. Yeah. I do think I am on the other side of it now of feeling that breakthrough. Yep. Again, I still use social media. There will be things cut from this episode that I will put out on social media, hoping that someone likes. Yeah. But even when I say that, I want them to genuinely like it.
And you want
I don't care about the
right
tap,
people
right?
that are relevant to the thing that you're pursuing and doing.
Yes.
And actually, I was gonna highlight the fact that the way that you've positioned and partnered with relevant sponsors in the area, like that's such a, again, that's like starting with a product and connecting who you're interviewing and what you're doing in a way like this journey makes sense. And versus, well, I'll just figure it out once I'm famous. And you're like, you don't, like, I was lucky enough to be deep enough into a creative career to have conversations behind the scenes and be like, okay, I met this person. They have 500,000 followers and they can't make a dime. And then I know this person who has 5,000 followers and they have a B2B client service business and they're making $1 million a year. Like, so I think early on realized like it's who this is. No, having a plan if you're trying to make it into a business, having a plan that where what you're doing there connects to how you actually fund the thing. And that also gets to, I just did a whole episode on social media again, talking through some of this stuff, because one of the core principles that I try to think about is that how people find me is directly connected to how I'd like to earn a living. And so I think you see so many, I always use the example of musicians, but it's every single area. You see so many musicians like creating, like trying to figure out how do I be funny so that I can be on TikTok. And I'm like, you have to know, like almost nobody finds a musician that's funny and then becomes a fan of their music. It's happened to me one time. I have a band that I love that I discovered because they were funny on TikTok and I love their music, but that's one out of millions of people. And so that's the other thing I think when it comes to social media is keep trying to get on less platforms that have nothing to do with the kind of stuff that I make. Yeah, and I think about it, the example I was giving, like if you're making food in the mall food court, you don't need to be giving samples in JCPenney and then be like, and I'll tell you how you get there. You have to log out of here and go to Spotify. Like that's too much. And you're saying, and if you really like my jokes, you're going to love my music. Like that is, nobody wants to take that journey. Right. That's such a hard sell. So that's the other way I've been thinking about how do I eliminate where I'm wasting time, where it's like this platform has nothing to do with what I do or want to be doing. And just because it's so hot right now, I'm not going to invest.
Yep. I have that conversation with, cause like a part of like the freelance work I do is like social media management and stuff like that. Right. And I'll have that conversation with clients up front where they're like, okay, well the last person we work with had us on all these platforms. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, because they're social media and we're supposed to have social media. And I'm like, you don't need a Twitter for your business. Based off of what you're doing, where you're at, what level you're at, all this sort of stuff, Twitter values you none. Ultimately, also, it might be the biggest, most active platform right now, but I'm also going to tell you a TikTok doesn't not value you because let's say we make a really cool viral video for your company that's local to Columbus, Ohio. It gets 1 million views. How many of those million people are walking through the door or buying your product in the next month? I would dare say maybe 1. Maybe 1. Otherwise, it's 0. And so it's, yes, there is also that value of like, because that's the other hard part of creating on social media is now everyone has to be all the things. You've got to be a musician and a comedian and a content creator and a videographer and a photographer and a designer and a blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm not going to sit and be like, hey, acquiring a bunch of different skills isn't cool. I think it's cool. I like doing that personally.
Or most creators have that impulse to do a lot of different fun things. That's cool. I'm down with that. Yeah, for sure.
But even what you were saying of like, where does that energy go? That's what I'm very protective of is like, listen, I can do all the things. I know how to do all the things. I can be funny. I can be scared and serious. I can be real life talker. I can be improver over here. I can be video guy, photo guy, design guy. Like, I can do all the things, but that doesn't mean that I have to be all of them to everyone all the time, everywhere.
And
so 100%. It's like, well, hey, I'm really going to be comedian in this avenue. I'm really going to be serious person in this avenue. And both of those are tied together by me being the core piece. So it's not some performative thing of like, I'm acting like this over here and I'm acting like, no.
Yeah.
It's still all extensions of me. So that's where the value is of like, all these things can be extensions of you. But also you have to not get trapped in the race of, I have to be all these things and I don't really want to be. I don't want to be funny, but I'm going to make this skit to try and make my song go viral because I saw somebody else do it.
Yeah.
Well, then one, you're pushing yourself in the wrong, because you're not doing it to like, oh, let me try and grow and see if I can be funny. You're doing it because I have to.
Yeah.
So people are probably going to see through that and it's not going to work. Then you're going to beat yourself up. Or the opposite, it does work. That skit does go viral.
And now you're known for that thing.
Now you're known for that, and you got to keep it up. So yes, it's obviously this crazy endless cycle.
I think I know that we're in the same zone. It's not that either of us imagine that, like we said at the start, building a creative practice is just difficult in every way. None of that stuff is me saying it's so easy. Why are you doing that? It's purely based on, always trying to find those levers where it's like, when I put energy into this, it has a significant return.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm a musician, if I was a musician, what I would do is treat Spotify like social media, keep my like discography records that I'm like being precious about as like vinyl. And then I would just be like, how many collaborations can I do with people I like? How can I release new stuff frequently? And like, just treat that, because that's where people discover music. Mm-hmm. And then the pipeline from, discovering you for the first time to being a fan and buying your record or going to your tour, it's a direct pipeline.
Yep. And
that energy is just going to be spent better there. I'm not a musician, so mine is a different version of that. But that is what I'm always thinking about.
Yeah.
And
it's also, a lot of it comes down to what foundation are you building for the thing that you're trying to, because nowadays I feel like most people jump to, oh man, the wall color that we're going to paint the living room and the pillows we're going to put on the couch are going to be beautiful. You didn't even build the foundation of the house.
Yeah, very true.
You have to have that first. You have to, because even if your living room is the most immaculate, beautiful, rad-looking living room ever, well, guess what? 2 weeks in, a big storm hits.
Because, exactly.
A big sinkhole opens up because you don't have a good foundation of what it's actually built on, and everything crumbles, and you've got a much larger problem on your hands when you could have just taken a little bit longer, built a little bit more of the foundation, got that structurally sound, so then, cool, we can enjoy this living room for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
And if this is a clip on Instagram, I'm talking to you, Andy. Get off there. It's not where you need to be investing your time. Like, that's where all this energy is coming from, is I need, like, daily reminders. Like, I just literally, the past, like, month and a half, been, like, really doing the work to try to get this mindset out of me, because it is so invasive. It's so, our culture, and like we said, like the tech companies are spending insane amount of money for you to just, it's so easy to see somebody just pop off on Instagram Reels or whatever and be like, okay, and you're like, wait a second, whoa. Do you need new people to see what you're doing? Or do you actually need to create a product? Mm-hmm. So I'm talking to you, man.
I'm going to make sure. I'm going to cut this. I'm going to send it to you like once a month. I'll be like, hey, dude, remember when you said this?
Get off there.
Before we begin to wrap up, I really want to talk about Invisible Things.
Yeah, cool.
Most recent project, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me all about it. What is it? It looks super cool from afar, and I want to know about it.
Yeah, so Invisible Things is a picture book that I co-created with my wife. We co-wrote it. I illustrated it. It's a project that started, like, the first time we ever talked about this idea was probably, I think, back in 2012. So it's over a decade long. It took that long to create a picture book out of it. And that actually came from the project that I did right around that time that I went and got diagnosed or started talking to my doctor about ADHD. And I did this project where I did a new character every weekday for a year. And it wasn't Invisible Things, but a lot of those characters became what I call Invisible Things. Invisible Things is personified invisible forces. So it can be things you could hear, things you could smell, all the things you could sense without your eyes. It could be scientific forces like gravity, dark matter, those kind of, phenomena, and then emotions and stuff like that. And that project was directly a product of doing that daily character drawing thing. And that daily character drawing thing was me doing something that I now know is actually like a Jungian philosophy thing, a Jungian psychology thing around active imagination, where you're externalizing yourself, you're fragmenting your psyche into multiple characters through active imagination. I didn't know any of that, but that's what I was doing. I had heard about it through Charles Schultz, the guy who created Charlie Brown. And he had said in my research phase that I mentioned earlier, I had heard him say this thing that I thought was really curious, like weird, because his name's Charles. So, of course, everyone always asked him, are you Charlie Brown? Like, is this autobiographical? And he would say, kind of. I kind of am, but they're all me. So Charlie Brown is the part of me that's a total loser. Snoopy is the part of me that I kind of wish I was. Linus was my spiritual side. Lucy is my sarcastic side, cynical side, all the way through. And at the time I thought, oh, that's such a bizarre idea. I'd never heard anything like it. And I did this daily character drawing primarily through that lens. Like, I'm going to do, every character is going to be just kind of a different side of myself. Instead of it being all jumble up here, I'm going to take like one aspect and I'm going to try to turn that into a character. And instead of like projecting onto people, as you do, like, as we do in our like defenses, I'm going to project on a page. I'm going to like put that stuff down so I can like look at it. And some of the characters were inspired by, other people. A little Easter egg is, we did a Kickstarter for that project, and I thought this was super unique at the time, but turns out he does this all the time. David Cross was our biggest backer, Tobias from Arrested Development. And so at that level, you got a character designed after you. And so one of them is definitely a never nude who has jean shorts on. So that's like, that was a really cool thing. Turns out he was like an early investor in Kickstarter because his cousin started it. And so he actually backs tons of projects. So it wasn't that, special. But I thought, I'm like, David Cross, like, dude, he's like, but I'm still like proud of it. So I did like 260 characters. And that whole process was the way into exploring all the symbols and like archetypes that I found interesting. And a lot of those things were like characters hiding, characters with masks. And eventually over time I realized like, oh, what I like about this is like, even in the videos of the Kickstarter, you can hear me saying this before I came up with Invisible Things. Like, this is about what's underneath the surface of life. Like, this is about, that's what's interesting to me. And even when I was in college, I got really frustrated because they would always be like, draw things you love. And I'd look at next, and they're drawing a dog, and they're drawing like a spaceship, and everything I could think of was literally invisible. Like, everything I was like obsessing over, like quantum physics. I was like reading, popular science, like not actual quantum physics, just like the stuff where you're like, dude, that's crazy, man. Like that stuff. Like, that's what I was obsessed with. And I just didn't know. I was like, I don't know how. I'm like, well, I picked the wrong profession because you can't draw any of the things I want to talk about. Right. And then, so it wasn't until doing that project, and then also just discovering like, there's actually a huge history for as long as people have been drawing. Like, symbols, that's the whole idea of a symbol, is that they're a invisible thing. That's what it is. So like, I think there's a million examples of personified invisible things, but it goes all the way back to, like Greek mythology. Like, like Zeus is like a personified version of lightning and storms and weather. And, Athena she's the goddess of war. Like, she's the personified war. Like they're us trying to put like a name and a face to a thing that we can't have a relationship with any other way.
Yeah.
So that's what that is. And I came up with the first one I came up with was a whisper, and I wrote this poem about it, and I told my wife about it. I think there could be like more of these. And then she came up with the second one, which was an echo. And then we just kind of kept working on it over time.
Man, it's so cool
Thanks.
to see.
Thanks.
I am so just like stoked to see it. It's like a publishing a book of any sort. I feel like it's such a feat. It's definitely a bucket list item for me.
Yeah.
I really, really want to figure that out in some way.
Yeah.
So when I see somebody do it in also just such a cool way, it's not like, and not that there's anything wrong with this, because I would probably do this, but it's not just a, hey, I'm Andy and here's 10 steps to becoming a cool freelance creative in my book and what it's like. It's a cool thing, know. It's personifying thoughts and feelings and using something that is unique to you and your view of them and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, as an outsider to it, it's one of the coolest things that I've been able to see and follow along with.
I really appreciate it.
And so on that same note, like and I know this is like the cliche thing, but like what's next? What are like hopes, and is it like I want to publish more books, or I want to grow the podcast in this way, or I want to start doing this? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think we are doing a lot of different things with Invisible Things. And then I have other picture books kind of in the works. One that's coming out in April that's not Invisible Things related project. So I'm going to continue doing picture books. But I think on the front burner going into the new year, I'm really trying to figure out this project called Right Side Out, which is the project about my mom. I've told versions of the story I was telling you in different scenarios. I've kind of been like talking about it on stage in talks that I've done over the past 6 or 7 years. Like it's kind of been a story that I've not crafted is a weird word because it's a true story, but figured out the way I want to tell it and also kind of apply story structures and stuff into it. And wrote about it. And I created a version of the first episode that I wanted to release on that project, and I was going to put it on my podcast. I made it about a year ago, and I sent it to a friendly acquaintance of mine that's in public radio, in that kind of podcasting space, and she was like, in true like public radio, form. I had sent her this thing. It was like just me talking, basically, and telling that story. And she was like, I loved it, but I found myself really wanting to hear your mom. That's a very like This American Life that kind of vibe. And I was like, oh, why did you say that? Because I've wanted to have a deeper conversation with her for a few years. And not really I hadn't seen her in probably 3 or 4 years at that point. But I just knew like every time I see her, we just like go get a burger and that's it. Like that, I didn't find a way to really have a deeper conversation than that. And so this was kind of a good way of doing that. So I went and played her one of my talks that tells the story. I had told her before that I talk about her, so she knew that. And she also knew it wasn't good things, or it was like complicated things. I went and showed her that, and then I recorded a conversation with her, and it was a really personally powerful experience. I would say the mother wound has been the most defining thing of my life. And I would say that experience of taking that experience, turning it into a story through, all the things I've learned, telling stories, reading books about stories for the past 10 years, to the degree in which I felt like I could explain to her what it was like. And so the first thing she said on that recording is, "Why did you have such a hard time?" Like, she got it. And so I'm kind of trying to figure out, I don't think I know the execution of that story. Like, I don't know what it is. I've thought about it as a book, a podcast, a YouTube series, some kind of one-person show, like all these different things. And I think the only thing I know to do is to do all of those things. And, you know, yeah, at some point, maybe I'll get tired of talking about it. I don't know, but it's going to probably be a podcast series to start the new year.
Yeah, man, I love that.
Thanks.
I love that. Okay, something that I would love to know is when you look back at your entire journey,
Yeah.
what do you feel like the biggest lesson you've learned is?
I think I really think that it is, it goes back to the idea that you can't make art you love if you hate yourself. I think that that's a fact. I think that the only way to love your art is to start by loving yourself. You can't love that self-expression if you don't love yourself. And I think that shift is I think it's a defining lens that every person is walking through life either seeing themselves as a bad thing to repress, overcome, minimize, get through, or as this is a mostly good thing. I need to figure out how to like cultivate it, grow it, love it, nurture it. I think most people walk around with one of those two lenses. And I think that seeing yourself as a good thing is a pretty transformative move.
If I want to play pretend for a second,
Yeah.
let's pretend time travel is real.
Yeah.
And you get to take me back to some point in your life. And two things are going to happen when we get there, right?
I love it. I'm ready.
You're going to give me some commentary on what's going on at this moment in life. And then also you get the opportunity to go talk to younger Andy and share something with him.
Yeah.
Where are you taking me? What are you saying? What are you sharing?
I think that I would go back to age 17 when I'm at that crossroads, and I'm kind of abandoning a lot of myself because I'm trying to distance myself from who I am because who I am is like my mom. And the good thing that happened from age 17 to 25, that I think there's a necessity to this that's kind of, I think it's really like what the hero's journey is, leaving home, going to a far off land and then coming back. I think that is classically like leaving yourself, like leaving your true self, going out there and trying to become something you're not, and then coming back. So there's a way in which I think there is an unavoidable aspect of that. But I think that I could have done it with a lot less shame. And I think that I wish I could go back to that 17-year-old me and be like, hey, man, you are right. You do need a lot of work. You are in trouble. How you're living is going to have serious consequences if you don't shift it. You are completely right about that. But instead of doing that through the lens of beating yourself up, trying to become something you're not, allowing people in your life to kind of dehumanize you. I think I was very attracted to like friendships that were where I really gave them a lot of authority in my life because they were different to me. I think if I could go back and say, hey man, like, let's build on the great stuff you got going on, rather than trying to tear you down and start from scratch. I think I probably could have saved a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Thanks.
I love it. Dude, this has been a blast.
Thanks. It was fun. I was having a great time.
I am so very thankful that you were down to do this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, is there anything major that you feel like we haven't covered or dove into that you're like, dude, we cannot
I mean, we
end
did
this?
pro wrestling. Like, I think I think we covered every single angle. Social media, pro wrestling, most of my mom baggage. I think that's the 3 things I came here to talk about.
Incredible.
Yeah.
We checked them off the list. Well, in that case, I have one final question for
Okay.
you. I end all these episodes with the exact same question. I'm going to throw it to you, and then we're getting out of here.
Cool.
So right now, I would love for you to pretend like everyone in the world is listening to you talk. You've got a live mic attached to everybody. We're throwing logic out the window. They can hear you. They can understand you. Everything, right? You have a live mic attached to everyone, everywhere, and you get to share something with everybody. What is it that you're telling them, and what would you want everyone to hear?
Whoa. Do I get, like, is it already started? Are they already hearing this?
It's there.
No,
This is
I've
like
already
the
started
movies
the
where,
wrong
like,
way.
for some reason, there's like a live stream of like the main character on
it's
every
like,
screen
like,
around the.
They take over, kind of like the Incredibles or something. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
I get that. Okay. Yeah, I think that. Okay, I'll say this. That this is a Joseph Campbell quote. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The cave you fear to enter is the part of yourself that you have left in the shadows. Is the part of yourself that you have distanced yourself from, that you've convinced yourself is bad, not okay, unacceptable. There are good reasons. You have good reasons to have tried to distance yourself from this, to hide it from yourself. It probably caused a lot of pain, a lot of destruction. There's good reasons that you have cut this part of yourself off. But who you are isn't a thing that can survive and be cut up. One of the best kind of stories around that is, any story you see that is, and now everyone in the world is like, whoa, what the hell's going on? But anytime you see a Fight Club, a Moon Knight, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, any multiple personalities things, that's what it's about, is that you cannot kill Hyde without Jekyll dying. You are not a thing that will exist. You're not an earthworm. You can't get cut in half and then you'll be fine. Now you're just 2 halves. Like, no, you will die that way. And loving yourself, cultivating yourself is about looking at those parts that you've abandoned and moving into them, because the treasure is in there. And I think that's what I would say, is that, find safe places to explore what that is, work out what's going on there, work through the stuff that really does need work. But I think it's the journey that we're here to do.
Dude, this has been so much fun.
Okay.
I
had to reach deep in there for that one.
That is incredible.
But I think I do really believe it. Yeah.
I love it. Well, do you want people to find you? Or we just talked about, all the social media stuff and all this, but we also talked about a ton of fun stuff that you do, podcasting, all the art, all that sort of stuff. Want people to find you? If so, where all can they seek you out?
Probably the 2 best places are my podcast, Creative Pep Talk, and on Instagram at Annie J Pizza is probably the central hub. Yeah.
Beautiful. Dude,
cool.
We made a podcast, man.
We sure did.
Thanks, you so
man.
much.
Great
dude.
question.
This was
great chat.
This was a blast, man. This was a blast.